Hello, it's Jeff Trickey here. Welcome to this webinar. We've got quite a diverse group of people with us today. The risk type compass has attracted interest across a lot of sectors, many of them quite new to us. So as well as psychologists, we will have people involved today who are from emergency services and from auditing, from risk managers, financial traders, insurance, and other financial institutions. So we try to make the presentation as coherent as we can across all those sectors. Also, I mean, some of the participants have got more knowledge about risk type than others. So again, we'll be steering a course somewhere down the middle, hopefully, so that it's accessible to everybody. And if you have attended any of the recent presentations at conferences, then there may be elements here that are similar. But we'll go through as quickly as we can the bits that are the basics and get on to the main themes. This is the first of two webinars that are intended to get people from having had some involvement with risk type to the level where they've identified that this is something interesting, and to take them from just something interesting to something useful, and from something useful to something I can do myself within my professional role. So the first of the seminars is going to introduce risk type, go through some of the basics, but also have a specific focus towards teams, team developments and its relevance to teams and the induction of teams, how to get high performance teams from the point of view of risk type. And the second one is, which will be in about a couple of weeks' time, the second webinar is really the hands-on end of all of that. So how actually to deal in practical ways with the team situation. Okay, so risk type, you can't manage what you can't measure. That's a quote attributed to Peter Drucker, the guru, well, not recently died, I think it must be a couple of years ago now. But Peter Drucker's view was that if you can't measure something, then you're at sea. You don't know if you don't know how much you've got, you don't know how much you need, you don't know if you could change things from A to B or not. So that's the thing. Okay, so this is kind of the agenda. It's about how to get to grips with people issues. There's a vast body of psychological research and psychological knowledge, and it's about personality differences and human behavior, and this isn't generally applied within the management sphere. So we want to attend to that. Psychology obviously is about people and it's about individuals. Building a team to suit a purpose. What influence would risk type have on that? And if you're not building a team, maybe you're just inducting a team that you've been handed to manage through a particular project. So how can you induct that team to maximize its communication and decision making? And then the point here is in order to do those things, we need to recognize risk type as significant, but also recognize that any risk type has a role to play. It's not that risk is good or risk is bad, but we need to celebrate risk type differences and to get the people collaborating openly in the most effective way possible. So it's a way of maximizing motivation of the group in order to build high performance team dynamics. Management expertise then. Management is a very mature profession. It has a lot of history, a lot of technology, and that would perhaps be a sort of taxonomy of the territory. A lot of knowledge, skills, some very fascinating methodologies that have had a huge influence over the last couple of decades. Things like Six Sigma and Agile and Lean technology and all sorts of techniques. So, and they're also training courses, qualifications, international standards. But what is not there is anything that really gets down to individual differences. It tends to be focused on systems and processes, procedures. It's very organizationally oriented. And of course, managers do make people decisions. They have to, of course, on a day-to-day basis. But it's on the basis of their own understanding rather than a knowledge personality per se. But it seems that within most organizations, personality is something for HR. It's something that's in the too hard basket for everybody else. It's all too complicated. And really, that isn't the case. And we would argue that managers really need to be most effective, issues like risk type are very constructive and very helpful for them. This is just an illustration of a systems approach. It's a simplified model of a retail distribution system. In the green boxes, you've got the people within the organization, and then the blue boxes are the people with whom they need to communicate. So this is quite a typical process that an organization might go through, or a government department might go through, or any time you're trying to address a particular issue. Let's have a look at the nuts and bolts of it. Let's take it all apart. Let's look at the elements that we need to consider, which of course is important and very relevant. What we want to emphasize, though, is that with every one of those boxes, there are people or there are teams. And who you've got in the box is absolutely critical. You can have the most splendid, insightful diagram of this nature. But if you don't take care of the appointment process and who's in those boxes, then you've got a problem. I'm going to talk to you now just about 4 very extreme types. I want to emphasize just how different people are. I think unless you're a coach or a psychologist or psychiatrist, you are unlikely to have been in a position, perhaps other than your own immediate family or your partner, you're unlikely to be in a position where generally you appreciate how extremely different people are. As a psychologist, it's something you get to know. But so I'm going to talk to you about just 4 people who are extreme. I'm going to caricature them a bit to exaggerate and to clarify the differences and just how extreme people can be. But Sarah would be an extreme type. She is somebody who, the most noticeable thing you would notice about her if you work with her is that she's very changeable. Some days one Sarah seems to come to work who's boisterous and lively and excited, and another time she seems to be quite moody and difficult to get on with. Someone who you can see in them the changes in mood. They wear their hearts on their sleeve, people of this type. So she's emotional and she's passionate, she's pessimistic. She expects not to be liked, but she's just extremely, and from the risk orientation point of view, she's just extremely very fearful of everything and anything. And people of this kind then are really close to the extreme end of neuroticism. And to them, because they live an emotional roller coaster of a life, which is alternating optimism and hoping this is going to work and investing a lot of themselves and their emotions in things, and then they go wrong. And that's a cycle that just repeats itself and repeats itself. So they develop, people of this with this characteristic would develop a view that all good things must come to an end. They kind of almost anticipate that this is too good to last. So from a risk point of view, though, very fearful, very risk averse, very stress prone, and tend to overreact to problems and finds uncertainty very uncomfortable. So that's Sarah. Now this is Henry. He has different sort of characteristics. He's extremely detail conscious and very systematic. He's obsessively organizing. He doesn't only have a backup plan, he will have a backup plan for the backup plan. He's intolerant of uncertainty and ambiguity, and he is very traditional and conservative, suspicious of anything that's new. So anything that's ambiguous is a problem for Henry. Anything that he can't put a label, get into the right box. And these, of course, are really important characteristics. I mean, it's a universal personality characteristic at a more moderate level. We all like to unravel uncertainty, and we will all have views about what this means and what that means, and what is the nature of this confusing, complex life that we're leading. But in his case, it's taken to extremes. So for him, it's a place for everything and everything in its place. He is very, from the risk orientation point of view, extremely compliant. He will do everything by the book. He will follow the rules, and that actually makes him very unable to be flexible outside of that context. Does nothing if he hasn't got approval for it, and he feels that he needs training and qualifications in order to be able to do anything. So he wants a book to work to, in other words. He wants a rule book. So this is Henry. The next is Juliet, who is really very, very different. She's almost the opposite of a Henry. She loves excitement. She's very easily bored, impulsive, undisciplined, and very, very imaginative. She will be very curious about things and therefore very easily distractible, very individualistic, an exciting sort of person in some ways to have around. She always sort of lifts the atmosphere, and she's an unpredictable element which you may or may not enjoy. So a rolling stone gathers no moss is the other words we're putting into Juliet's mouth. So she's very risk-taking, dismissive of petty rules, but then she probably thinks most rules are petty. And she sees opportunity always before paying any attention to what risks might be involved. So she's carefree, she's unpredictable. That's Juliet. And finally, our fourth, Peter. Peter is really the other end of the scale to Sarah. Peter, rather than being anxious about anything, seems to lack any anxiety at all. And when things are going wrong in the workplace or in the organization, when you're facing a crisis, Peter seems oblivious to that fact. He manages to maintain a calm, confident, composed demeanor, whatever else is going on around him. So unemotional, difficult to unsettle, always optimistic, always bouncing back. If anything goes wrong, it just dusts themselves down and gets on with life. So for him, all's for the best in the best of all possible worlds. You find Peter very irritating if you're working with him, if you're facing a crisis and pressure, because he doesn't seem to show it. Other people are frowning and fretting and flustering and rushing around trying to sort something, and he will just stay absolutely calm. So it's sort of want to go up to him and tickle him or ruffle his hair or something to get through that. But he's very self-assured, very predictable, and extremely resilient. I mean, he is resilience personified. Okay, those four extreme people. If I just come back to our diagram for the moment and just consider what the difference might be. For example, in box 1, if you had a Sarah there who's dealing with customers, Sarah would sometimes be irritable, sometimes very intolerant of the questions being asked or the demands being made of her, and other times very enthusiastic and positive. So it would depend very much on the day, a bit of a lottery if you get Sarah on the end of the phone. On the other hand, if you get Peter, Peter might as well be a recorded message. He's going to be so calm, so systematic, so straightforward and unperturbable, very optimistic and positive. So that box would be very different depending which one. And if you look at box 2, ordering parts, for example, now if Henry were ordering parts, he would have duplicates and duplicates and duplicates. He'd have everything written down absolutely in detail. He would have checked it very thoroughly and got other people to confirm it, so that when he goes to the supplier, he has no doubts whatsoever. He's absolutely on top of it. If that was Juliet, on the other hand, more likely that she's written something down on the back of an envelope somewhere, not sure where she put it, not quite sure what they really want, but she thinks it's this and she thinks it's that, and approximate will do. So you can see how you may have a flow diagram here, but the actual nature of the flow is going to very much depend on what's in the box. So why does it all matter then? Well, firstly, because all people are the source of organizational risk. So it's kind of pervasive. Well, we say all people. We think it is all people, really. But if it's everybody, then it's got to be important. Research management presents different individuals with different challenges. All of our 4 characters that we've just described face a very different challenge in being compliant, in addressing the requirements and the rules of the workplace or whatever context they're in. So compliance is actually a very personal, highly differentiated issue. So it can be a struggle. I mean, we all face the balance between what's expected of us and what we want. So the expectations are one thing, our desires, our needs, our dispositions are very different. So in order to meet expectations, then we have to address a particular issues. So blanket regulations, which are what we rely on very often, blanket regulations, training procedures, policies, all have limited impact. Individual and team focus is essential if you're really going to get down to the detail and optimize performance, especially at the team level. So how can risk type help with all of this? Risk type is based on two distinct aspects of human nature. The first is fear. All creatures experience fear in some form or another. Human beings, of course, do as well. And so people are more or less fearless. So at the one end, people are a bit like Sarah, very nervous, pessimistic, apprehensive, easily stressed, always have high levels of anxiety. Never seems to go away for them. At the other end of that axis, or of that characteristic, the other end of the scale, are people who also almost seem fearless. So they do amazing things that we find surprising and something that would be way beyond our own capability of considering. So they're relaxed, perhaps very daring, they're calm, they're very flexible. So that's one characteristic that differs from person to person. The other characteristic from person to person is the degree of impulsivity. And this is fundamental. So some people are highly impulsive. So I'm looking at the bottom right-hand side of the screen now. So they might seem to be unpredictable. They're more like the Juliet we described, approximate, challenging, impulsive. And when it comes to attention to detail, they may be very vague on the details. But the way people have learned, I guess, to deal with that carefulness and that recklessness is that we become, or some of us are, very prudent, very planful, very consistent and organized and detailed about life generally. So they manage impulses and they manage uncertainty through their prudence and their planning. Now, if you take those two axes, the fear and the impulsivity, it would look like this. And of course, everybody is somewhere on both of those axes. So somebody, you, I, everybody are somewhere between intense and composed. We have a normal sample of this, so we have some people who are very, very extreme at the intense end, and some who are very extreme at the composed end. And similarly, between carefree and prudent, how impulsive are you? You are somewhere along that line too. And of course, if you're somewhere on both of those, there's a possibility you're extreme in any two of them. It might be intense and carefree, or carefree and composed, which gives us a model that looks like this, a logical taxonomy of 8 different risk types. So the risk type taxonomy isn't plucked out of the air. It's not just a notion that occurred to us, let's have 8 risk types. It comes from the research, from our research into the personality and the distribution of these characteristics across a substantial sample of people. So let's just consider about these more complex types, because the complex types have got 2 lots of characteristics that interact with each other to create a distinctive set of characteristics. So starting at the top, the wary type are both anxious because they're very intense, but they are also determined to be very organized. So at the extreme, you've got someone who's very passionate about everything that they want to achieve, and if they're very prudent, what they want to achieve is absolute organization. So control is at the center of the wary type. They want to control things. They want to see everything controlled. First of all, what's most immediate to them about themselves and their own decision making, but those around them and the world ultimately. Now, at the other end, the other extreme, you've got the adventurous type, and they have 2 reasons why they will take risks. The first of those reasons is because, like Juliet that we discussed, they're carefree. That means that they are spontaneous. They hate things to be predictable. They love things to be exciting and uncertain. They actually enjoy uncertainty. And not only that, but they're also composed. So they're very calm about it too. So your adventurous type, if they're the most extreme that's possible, are people who are very, very calm, but they are not frightened of anything. And they would want some stimulation, they want excitement, they look for it. So that's our adventurous type. They're the intrepid people who go off and do extraordinary things. And this is the case. This is a number of people we know now, don't we? And some of you probably listening to this now, you know that you're in the adventurous category. So looking at the horizontal axis there between spontaneous and deliberate, the deliberate type are both prudent and composed. So they're not fearful, but they are very organized. So they will go into any situation. They won't fear situations. They won't write things off as absolutely a no-no, but they will absolutely read up about it, make sure they know absolutely the facts, and then they will go into it in a very systematic way. So quite interesting, really, that one for the financial sector, isn't it? And then the opposite to that are people who are, and this is quite an intriguing risk type, the people who are both intense and they're carefree. And we call them spontaneous because these are people who are impulsive, they are excitement seeking, but they're also fearful. So how does that work out? It's an intriguing one. We describe this as like moths to a flame. These are people who are anxious about being carefree and taking risks, but they are really drawn to it. They're really attracted to the idea of doing it. It's been described by some people, or people in a workshop that we ran on one occasion, as being the pop star syndrome. People who want the limelight, who seek the limelight, they want adoring fans, they want 40,000 people at the O2 cheering and applauding them. And that is the way they will get their reassurance. And if they're not there, then they are remorseful and looking for missing the reassurance that that sort of experience gives them. So the spontaneous type then, moths to a flame. This is how it looks on the compass. In the compass, you'll see the first thing I'll say is in the middle, typical group. There are some people who score so near the mean on both of those axes that it's very problematic to define them as one or the other. So that's a typical group, undifferentiated. About 10 or 12% of people fall in that sector. So they're not a type, but the various risk types, where if your dot is near the edge, then you're more extreme. So the example we have here is someone who's quite an extreme wary type, but look, they're quite near to intense. Now that is, we need to take that into account because this is a continuous 360-degree spectrum. Yes, we label these types separately, but they're not separate in the sense that, say, Myers-Briggs type, Jungian types are supposed to be, which is there are different sort of characters, almost a different subspecies. It isn't like that. Everybody just happens to fall somewhere on this spectrum. This is a fact, and you do, and I do, and it's continuously varied. Our labels are more like the labels on or the numbers on a clock face. They just tell you where you're up to. It's continuous. Time is continuous, and our risk type spectrum is continuous as well. The opposite, though, the facing types are absolutely opposite to each other, and as we say, strongest at the edge. These are just little one-liners that describe the 8 types in summary. So if we start with wary, because that's at the top of the compass, those are the people who are well organized but very anxious and also fearful, and particularly fearful of failure, so they passionately seek to control. So that's a complex type. The next is a simple type, the prudent. The dominant characteristic is they're cautious, very self-controlled, very organized, very systematic, comfortable with continuity and familiarity. The deliberate type, these are people who are imperturbable, they are confident and systematic, but they're also fearless and calm and very well prepared. Don't go into anything with their eyes closed. The composed type, calm, cool-headed and optimistic, and seem sometimes to be almost oblivious to risk. These can be quite extreme risk takers. And the adventurous type, who are like the composed, but also like the next type, the carefree. So they're calm, emotional, but impulsive and daring and up for any challenge. Carefree type, spontaneous, excitement-seeking, a bit chaotic, a bit like life to be exciting. They'll do things to make things happen, just to keep life interesting for them. And then the spontaneous type, this was our moths to a flame. They're uninhibited, they're excitable, they're unpredictable, like their carefree type, but they're also distraught, they're emotional and distraught when things go wrong. So intense, finally, are the people who are enthusiastic and committed. They're passionate, they wear their hearts on their sleeve, but they're also learn to be pessimistic because they invest in their expectations. When they invest in people who are almost unattainable, they don't often work out, and so they become pessimistic, and they live a roller coaster existence. Now this is interesting, and it was a wonderful thing to discover, but our data, this is a portrayal of the total data. And you can see that there's extraordinary balance between the various risk types. The diagram is accurate, and the numbers, percentage of each risk type are there. So all those risk types I've described, I'm describing, of course, the extremes so far. But those types are, to some degree then, prevalent in the population in a very evenly distributed sort of way. Now, I want to talk now for a minute about dispositions and behavior. I mean, this, if you know about personality, it's something we can always remind ourselves of, because we get easily into a situation where we talk about personality as if the link between personality and behavior were some sort of mechanical link and totally predictive. And of course that offends people because it simply isn't true. So we're not talking about a mechanistic link. We're talking about personality as an undercurrent, if you like. Of course we have free will. It doesn't matter if you're an extrovert, an introvert, or those common parameters of personality. That doesn't mean you can't be anything else. You can strive to be anything, and you may succeed some of the time. The point is, an undercurrent like that has a persistent and pervasive influence. Yes, it changes over lifetime, so it may moderate throughout the working life, slowly and gently, but whatever your dispositions are, they are there. They anchor your behavior. And this is how we illustrate it. So risk type we see as the anchor. You are what you are as far as risk type is concerned. But that doesn't mean to say your behavior is limited. Just like the boat in the illustration, which is moving with the wind and the weather, and also with the tide. It's going up and down as the tide comes in and out. It's moving and drifting one way or another, and it's bouncing around when it's choppy. So behavior is very, very varied, clearly. But the anchor is there. And if you were viewing this image through your seaside bedroom window, you were looking at the yacht every morning and noting where it was, you would soon work out where the anchor was. But at any particular moment you wouldn't. And that's exactly like behavior. You may, people at interview can be very plausible, very attractive, and none of the characteristics that are really their natural disposition may show in that sort of context. Some people, of course, love interviews. The fact of the matter is, though, when you've been working with them for 2 or 3 months, you begin to learn what it is about them, which is systematic. So that's exactly the same as watching the boat through the window. So we would say risk type is an aspect of temperament. It's very deeply rooted, and it's persistent, and it's pervasive. Those are key words in our understanding. And what's more, it's measurable. You can say to what extent someone has those dispositions. And so the predictions are long-term, like watching the boat. It's not that you will see it immediately in a person. People learn how to behave socially. It's not until you get maybe closer to them that you'll learn what they are really like. Risk attitude, then, on the other hand, varies hugely. We describe it as kaleidoscopic because it's incredibly variable. It's superficial. If you look at people's attitude to financial risk before 2008, it's very different to what it is today. Records were broken in the rate at which people repaid money, just as records had been broken at the rate at which they were lending it. So it changes very rapidly. It's readily influenced. We would say probably the Paralympics had a huge impact on people's perception of disability. But this is not measurable. It's something that changes like the weather, and it's unpredictable. Except in the very short term, while people are keeping it together, then yes, they can live up to the way they would like to present themselves. So we measure risk attitude when we measure risk type. Obviously, it is part of the picture, but it is for us. It's an issue of, okay, today, where are you most likely to take risks, rather than presuming that there's something more fundamental that you can measure. And the final measure that comes out of the risk type compass is a measure of risk tolerance. So here is the person. The red block represents the person. It's that wide because we take into account the margin of error, which is associated with any measure or any estimate. And the markers along the scale from 0 to 100 indicate where people who are of a typical wary type, or intense, or prudent, or adventurous, where they would fall. So that's the final measure that comes out of the assessment process. Now, how do we put that all together? So let's turn to the practicalities here. which what we're trying to do basically is to match people and roles. And if we're talking about in a group situation or team situation, we're talking about their relationships and we're talking about their performance. From the relationship point of view, the match, the most obvious match, is that people will be attracted to others who share their values and their interests or their preferences. They will immediately identify those people. They find themselves comfortable with them. They share their outlook. They have something in common. And what's perhaps even more important, they won't offend each other, because the things that are important to them are important to the other party. And when you get people with very different values, then it's very easy to offend one another. Hence, grandma's advice never to talk about religion and politics, certainly not on the first date anyway. And so, of course, values and preferences affect organizational culture because people tend to gather in those sorts of groups. And there's something called the attraction, selection, attrition hypothesis. This is the notion that groups or professions or organizations will attract people according to their reputation. And if you have particular values and preferences, you might be attracted to work in Marks and Spencer's, or you might be attracted to go and work for Lloyd's Pharmacy or for any other organization. And of course, the organization has a selection process, and that will be biased towards bringing in people that are like and fit the culture of the organization, and the people who don't leave. So there's a sort of mechanism there, a formula by which organizations will develop over time a particular culture. So that's all about relationships, though. The other side of the equation is performance, and performance is about people's skills and knowledge and experience. Yes, it is, but it's also about their disposition. You can have all the knowledge and skills and experience you like, but if you're in a role which is about attention to detail, for example, and you're not, then you will struggle to perform consistently in that respect. And it's the same with any of the dispositions. In other words, your personality. Your personality will have an influence on your ability to deliver the skills and knowledge that you actually have. And what we would say, as far as personality is concerned, and particularly risk type, there's actually strength in diversity. Risk types have a very specific orientation towards risk. If you've got a group of people, you have the potential, if you like, to have eyes in the back of your head. You can include within that group people who are very risk averse and will flag up any problems or likely difficulties, and you can have people who are gung-ho crazy and got wonderful, wonderful ideas, but some of them are just not workable. And that mix can be very effective. It's about managing the mix, isn't it? This is just an illustration from some of our data from different professional groups, just illustrates how different risk types tend to group in different professions. There's 4 professions there, and you can see the circle nearer the center, the ring nearest the center, the colored ring near the center, represents our total population, if you like, or our total sample. And the other rather wonky graphic represents the incidence of each of the risk types within that particular profession. I mean, the most extreme here, I think, and easiest to grasp are auditors. In auditors, you have very few carefree types. They're training, the whole business of auditing attracts people who like organization and like things to be systematic. And so, but they all probably have to do things like sign off on the books for Enron and that kind of thing, which must be quite scary. Their whole reputation is on the line. They're dealing with massive organizations, very large amounts of money, so they don't need to be fearful, otherwise they'd never sleep at night. So the deliberate type is well represented there. Recruiting, there you've got the opposite almost, because rather than having no carefree types, you've got a predominance of carefree types. So the carefree types are people who are fast thinking, think on their feet. And if you think about the recruiting role, that's how those people need to be, probably. Okay, so when it comes to putting this team together, then what are the fault lines that you have to anticipate? Well, you will get tensions among groups of people which tend to initially form around their likes and their dislikes, and along demographic lines. So it's probable that people, if you have a random group of people in a room meeting for the first time, people might move to people of the same age. They might move to people of the same gender. People who dress like they do, if that's any clue to their background. people with similar levels of education, similar beliefs. So those are the kinds of things that would normally happen within a group of people. Now, if you have a group that you're trying to bring together in a task or a project, then the first step for managing that group is to be task oriented. This is a good way of dealing with the tendency for people to form subgroups and factions, because you're in it together. Everybody has a common goal, and by identifying the common goal and identifying with it, that helps for people to appreciate these other people are here because they've got a different role to me, and we are going to be mutually dependent on one another, interdependent. So focusing on the task is a way of beginning to get that group to work together. Dealing with relationships is not the first thing you want to do. If you put a very varied group of people and impose on them a drink in the evening or some sort of social situation, it'll be very awkward, very uncomfortable, and it'll probably do as much to consolidate the factions as it will, because people cluster together even more perhaps under those contexts. So first of all, first task is to deal with the task orientation. Secondly, with the relationships, which will develop, particularly when you've got a respect for the diverse contributions being made by the different members of the team. Decision making, of course, also is influenced by personality. I mean, how are decisions made? There's a lot of research that tells us that personality has a very significant influence on decision-making style. And just some of those, for example, neurotic people make avoidant decisions. That's research supports that view. Whereas conscientious people will make much more rational decisions, and agreeable people will make very more dependent decisions. So there's an influence that might be expected from personality, and of course the same will be true for risk type. Decision making is a part of your disposition and a part of your risk type. Now the issue, one of the big issues on decision making, as far as teams are concerned, is what's described as risky shift. If you get a group of people who are prone to take risks, then the output from that particular group of people will polarize in ever increasingly risky ways. And similarly, if you've got a group of people who are in general more risk averse, then they will polarize in the opposite direction. They'll become more and more wary and cautious and risk averse. So when you're building a team that's fit for purpose, you have to take these factors into account. So we use the football analogy at times to clarify, if you like, the difficulties of organizing a team. What football managers do is try and organize the team, and they try and do it every week, and they try and mix the players in order to get the best performance and so on. And team building is like that. The football analogy is useful because we know that the person in goal has to view everything that's happening around them as a potential risk. They have to be risk averse in their outlook. They have to have a very low threshold for anything that might result in a goal, obviously. So that's one end of the pitch. At the other end of the pitch, the striker has to be quite the opposite. They have to be innovative, they have to be creative, they have to see everything as a potential opportunity and go for it. Things that have never ever been done before, so they have to be creative. And of course the rest of the team have to be disciplined in knowing when to be risk averse and get back and get information, and some of them need to know they need to get forward and take opportunities too. So they have to be disciplined in the way they manage themselves. So that's what you're trying to do when you put a team together. And of course you can do it at the point of selection. If you are involved in the selection of your team, then you can choose people who would seem to fit the role from a risk-taking point of view. Do we need more stimulation in this team, or do we need to put the brakes on? And if you put the brakes on, then you need some more risk-averse people, perhaps, or you need to consider that as a part of the selection process. If you're just handed a team, then it's down to the induction process. Then it's much more a question of getting people to appreciate and understand what differences in risk type mean. And of course, what they mean for opposite risk types is that A, that you don't understand them. Where is that person coming from? If you're really a very risk-averse person, in the extreme, and you've got someone there who's the opposite of you, someone who's maybe a carefree type, then where is that person? They're like on another planet. And not only that, whenever you try to propose anything, they always seem to be disagreeing with you. So risk types are very prone then to be in conflict with each other, and then to take things personally, when in fact they're nothing to do with taking them personally. They're due to the reality of that person's perception and their orientation. And that has to be understood and respected, and can be understood and respected. And it makes a lot of difference to the way those people will work together. So these are the aims of, if you like, of team development, to get to that position where those people, whoever they are going to work to the best they can together, the best possible way. We produce a group report which tries to assist with this process and understanding of it. This is a scatter plot, if you like, of a team, and you can see immediately where people lie. So we can see that there's somebody there who's very extreme, and rather like the example I've just given. And somebody E is somebody who's very prudent and cautious. And you've got some in the middle, but you notice too, you've got three types that are absolutely missing. So when you're looking at team dynamics, you've got to say, well, what's missing from our team? What don't we have? As well as what do we have, and where are we? And of course, the people who are closest together will tend to form factions. So there'll be a tendency to do that. Another perspective is just to look at it from risk type influence. So a second graphic that we provide, and this is for the same group of people. So how much influence will the characteristics of each risk type be having on the dynamics of that team and the way it operates, on who communicates with who and how decisions are made? So it's another way of approaching the same story but from another direction. And thirdly, if we take all of those people and say, what's the average of our scatter plot then? Where are we? What's the center of gravity of our team? Then that is another way of looking at, say, okay, so we are kind of composed, but really very near towards the typical. Is that how we would react as a team? Is that how we feel we are? And it stimulates another conversation about what is our team? What are the characteristics and dynamics of our particular group of people? And finally, where does everyone, this is the fourth of the graphics, the fourth perspective on the team, where do they sit in terms of their own risk tolerance? And we can see immediately, obviously, Jim and Neil are as far apart as anybody in that particular group of people in terms of risk tolerance. And although some of them will be risk types, their risk tolerance may be quite similar. And that's perfectly feasible with the risk types. Risk types don't, although the extremes map out across the scale from 0 to 100, you have some people who will be quite near the center, although they may be from opposing risk types. All right, team issues then. Well, risky shift, polarization of risk, and that phenomenon is obviously a concern. If you're oblivious to who you're putting into teams and you're giving those people decision-making responsibility, maybe in insurance or financial sector or in any position, then you'll be unleashing something that you're simply unaware of. And what we want to do, what we would want to strive for, is team self-awareness. We know where we are as a team. And that's important too, because we have to deal with other teams in the organization, and we have to appreciate that we're different to them. If you want to communicate with them, you've got to compromise. You've got to be able to get across the barriers that might be created simply because your team is from a risk point of view, a very different one. You've got to look at the internal dynamics, the relationships, the communications within the team, as well as the communications beyond the team. So you're looking at the risk type balance and understanding it. And you have to have it, and consider its implications for decision making. Now, in all of that, as we started off at the beginning of this webinar, pointing out that compliance is a personal issue. So we're back to that here now with personal accountability. You've got to bear in mind that people then have a different challenge according to their risk type in dealing with what's required, what's expected. And they have to take personal responsibility for that, and to understand themselves and to have a clear plan and an awareness of how they're going to deal with it. So this then is pretty much the agenda for our next webinar. We'll be going into all of that and looking again at how the different perspectives on risk type can help in dealing with these, either a point of selection or induction of a team or management of a team. At an organizational level, of course, the thing blows up into organizational culture. And I just want to show you an illustration here of something we've been researching on, and we'll continue to research. But I'm just going to click into this link here. And I want to show you this. This is a map of an organization that is colored according to the risk tolerance of the group. So if the color is a strong green, then you've got their high risk taking group. I just confirm that because I can, let me get up to full screen. Here we go. And if we put it on showing average, we can see the average risk taking. No, I've got it the wrong way around. The higher risk taking people are in the pink, and the less risk takers are deeper green. And that color, the percentage tint, is directly related to their degree of risk taking. And this is something that you would build up. It's not something that you would perhaps do as a result of the survey, but probably you'd start working, hopefully, with, if I go back to names, you might start with the board or and the execs and get them to understand their own propensity for risk and gradually build up the organizational team. And of course, you can add teams if you want to. I'll just show you how this works. You can add some new teams here. You can also indicate by using a dotted line what the lines of responsibility and accountability might be. And then if you want to name those new teams, it's down here. It says board of directors there, but if I click on this one, it'll say it's new team, and you can change it. I won't go into that. It's just an illustration of how things might look across an organization, so you know what you're dealing with as the risk manager. Okay. So finally, just a final comment. From our work over the last 4.5 years now with risk, and we entered that world with no real background professionally. We're business psychologists at PCL, and we work in all kinds of sectors, but this was a new one for us. And what our conclusion is that we need risk takers. Risk has got itself a very bad name, and although health and safety is obviously a very important process, it's wrong to look at all risk in that light. You cannot eliminate risk. It's impossible to. There's a bigger risk in not taking risk at times. And so entrepreneurs, creative salespeople are vital to the life of the nation or to the organization. And of course you need heroes. You need people who will do the unexpected and the original for heroic reasons. And you need people who will challenge the status quo, otherwise there'll be no change. There are two reasons why you can fail. Enron is one example, so risk-taking that they've disappeared without trace. And Kodak, so lacking in risk-taking that they disappeared without trace. So it's all about getting the right balance. Risk has to be managed in both directions. You have to manage for more risk where you need it and for less where you need less, and for the right balance. Well, thank you for your attention, and we'll look out for information about our next webinar, which is going to be the hands-on end of all of that. And thank you for your attention.